count now to 10, along with me, repeating the thought, I'm going to sleep. I'm going to sleep. 1, 2.
Focusing attention on a moving object brings about concentration that may lead into a state of hypnosis. Stay tuned to Science in Action and learn about this valuable medical tool, hypnotism.
In the past, hypnotism has been associated with hocus pocus, with entertainment, and with quackery. Today, we know it is a valuable means of relieving pain and of learning more about behavior of the subconscious mind. Now, in recognition of this, the American Medical Association in 1958 declared the use of hypnotism to be a legitimate tool in the practice of medicine. To demonstrate medical use of hypnosis, we have invited a distinguished physician who has been using hypnosis in his practice of obstetrics and gynecology for 17 years. He is a member of the California Medical Association, and he has been associated with a panel of doctors offering symposia on medical and dental hypnosis in the major cities throughout the United States. I would like to welcome to Science in Action, Dr. David B. Cheek. How are you, sir?
Thank you, Dr. Harold. Hypnosis has been opening new horizons in medicine and in dentistry. It's opening very exciting horizons in the understanding of subconscious human behavior.
Perhaps by way of quick review, we could go back to some of the people that have done the basic work in this field.
Well, hypnosis has been used for many centuries, but among the names of people that have really contributed, I think perhaps first we should mention Franz Anton Mesmer. He was a Swiss who came to Vienna and then to Paris. He was wrong in his conception of what hypnosis was. He thought it came from within as a great power for healing. He did much good, but he was mistaken. Let's go over here to this chart. Mesmer was investigated while he was in Paris by a group of scientists, among whom was Benjamin Franklin, our own. They discredited him by showing that his effects were brought about by the autosuggestion of his patients. It fell into disrepute for a while, and then Elliotson, a great British surgeon, used hypnosis as mesmerism successfully. They're the same thing. Then Braid, James Braid, in 1843, gave us the name hypnosis. He also an Englishman. Then Esdale, a Scotchman going out to India, used hypnosis very successfully for surgery. He did over 3,000 operations using hypnosis as the only means of pain relief. His great contribution was that he found his mortality of previously 50%. This seems enormous, but it's because they didn't know about infection in those days. This mortality dropped to 5% after he began relieving his patients of pain and of fear. Something happened that was important for those patients.
These activities then were taking place in Europe and in India. What was happening in the United States?
Well, in the United States, there were a number of physicians using hypnosis during the 1800s, but not until Milton Erickson, I think, did we have someone who really contributed to our knowledge. Milton Erickson is living now in Phoenix, Arizona. He's still active. He teaches a great deal. He showed us that we should use permissive suggestions with patients rather than the directive type that were used by these older schools. Erickson developed the techniques of questioning into subconscious by using muscle action, finger signals that I hope to show you with you. Leslie Lecron is a clinical psychologist in California, also has contributed a great deal. He developed the use of the pendulum, which we'll show you. William Kroger is a gynecologist, obstetrician, who's been a pioneer in the use of hypnosis in this area. Aaron Moss, an Eastern dentist, has contributed a great deal in dental. There have been a great many men. Other than these, we've got over 5,000 physicians and dentists and psychologists using hypnosis in America today. We feel sure that there will be more as hypnosis is better understood.
Dave, everybody knows the word hypnosis, but how would you actually describe it as a specialist in this field?
Oh, that's very hard to define, Earl. I'd say, though, that I like to think of it as a defense mechanism. It's a way of protection against danger and stress that's used by animals as well as by human beings. We find it everywhere in life.
In other words, this is a perfectly normal thing. There's no supernatural or subnatural material connected with it.
It isn't limited at all to the stage or to special techniques in the office.
Perhaps we could step over to this next section and see the various stages of hypnosis that are involved in these procedures.
Yes, ordinarily we feel that only about 10% of people can go into a deep hypnotic state. This isn't true at all when we consider need. When there's need and a thorough understanding of what hypnosis can do, 100% of people will respond. The stages are rather difficult to define. Earl, I think we can show them perhaps a little better, but generally speaking, it's a sort of a vista rather than a sharply defined entity. There's a loss of awareness, and then as we get down further with better concentration, less interest in other things, the subconscious mind takes over, the conscious mind sort of drops off into the wings, and we find this apparent loss of interest in surroundings. It's there all the time, it's an apparent one. As we go deeper, we're able to remember so vividly and think so clearly that we can pick segments of our life out and relive them. This is called age regression, sort of Friday Murphy.
Yes.
There's a deeper level, too, in which we have suspended animation, like the yogis are able to produce. Houdini, I think, did so, too. It's sort of like animal hibernation.
Speaking of hibernation, we have an animal here that may be used as a demonstrator. This,
Hello.
of course, is an opossum.
Yes, and he's holding his position pretty stiff, isn't he?
Why did you do that?
That's called catalepsy, Earl, and we find it in human beings, too. Animals use it as a protection.
I'm not touching him. His ears are moving.
He's listening, and he isn't very friendly, is he?
No.
We picked him up in the backyard of my landlord. These little animals, they don't play possum, Earl. It's business for them. It's life and death. If a dog attacks one of these, he'll drop in his tracks, and his temperature comes down, his breathing stops, his heart rate slows down to almost zero.
Much like this photograph.
Yes. And the dog loses interest. He thinks this is a dead thing and goes off and looks for the real one. And when he's gone, the opossum seems to know. He hears, and he'll get up and run away. These animals move so slowly, they have to have this defense mechanism. Human beings will do this sometimes in an accident. When they're jarred suddenly, they may go into exactly the same sort of state.
I think I'll put Uga back in the
Yes.
place over here and go back to sleep again. In you go.
He'll like us better.
Our next demonstrator comes all the way from Juneau, Alaska. Her name is Mrs. Eva Ely. And so in this part of the program, I'm going to sit on the side and watch how you go through the various steps in hypnosis. So,
All right,
Dr. Cheek,
Earl.
take over.
I suppose I should have someone who had never used hypnosis before, but time limits us. Mrs. Ely, who is an expert, how do you do, Mrs. Ely, has used hypnosis a great deal and for a considerable help to herself. Ms. Ely, would you give us a little demonstration here of how you can use hypnosis? You were holding this pendulum earlier. Hold it again and just rest your elbow down. Lacron, whom I mentioned earlier, found that the unconscious can move this pendulum in different directions. Just think of it going back and forth this way. Now think of it going in a circular direction. Lacron assigned answers to these movements. For instance, thinking of a yes might make the pendulum go this way and a no this way, just as we can nod or shake our heads in sort of unconscious response to things that are going on. Keep looking at that crystal ball, will you? That's not a magic one. It's just something that you can watch. Keep watching it, though, until everything around gets sort of hazy and indistinct as your concentration improves. And when your subconscious mind recognizes that you're in hypnosis, I'd like to ask it to pull your fingers apart and let that pendulum drop. Now, if Zero were wide awake, we could say that when she drops that pendulum, that will be 10 on a scale. That 20 could be a depth at which she could concentrate so well that she didn't hear when someone would speak to her. This is sort of like the man reading the newspaper at the breakfast table, not hearing his wife question him. We've all been in this sort of state before. It's familiar. Drift a little deeper now, if you will, Mrs. Ely. The deeper level that we might call 30 would be this age regression that we showed on the scale. Let your hand go down now. She has been showing, by keeping this arm in position, the catalepsy just as Uga did over there. Now, would you put your other hand up on the table, please? And I'd like to ask your subconscious mind to lift this pointer finger of your right hand in answer to something that would be a yes, and this one for no, and your left thumb can be, I don't want to answer that question. You should always have the privilege to refuse an answer. The right thumb can be, I don't know. And let me just ask you a question that I think we can get an answer to. Do you enjoy being on television? See which finger wants to lift. And I want you to notice the way the finger goes up. It isn't a quick motion. It's a trembling, slow lifting. And I'm glad you do enjoy it. Now I'd like to ask you to use a familiar experience. We've all been able to lie on an arm and have it go to sleep. Think of lying on that left arm for a long time until you've blocked off its blood supply and it's numb. And when you've got it really numb, from the elbow down, I'd like to ask you to reach over and pinch it, Mrs. Ely. Pinch hard. You'll feel pressure but no pain. Now reach up above, will you, and pinch there, and pinch just as hard. Is there a difference in the feeling there? This is one of the ways of developing anesthesia. Another is to direct attention elsewhere. If you're out in a mountain meadow, you may not feel any pain at all if you're pinching yourself over here in the arm. Now I'd like to ask you to think of a word that can be a symbol, Mrs. Ely, for going back into hypnosis. Just think of a word that to you will mean the ability to go in again. And when you've thought of that word, I'd like to ask you to awaken. And while you're doing this, Dr. Harold and I will go over to this scale and go over some of the things that we've been demonstrating here. Now, you see, we can leave her like this, and
perfectly all right.
Yes.
The flickering of the eyelashes there is something that was very interesting to me.
Yes, let's come back to that, and you'll see it, I think, a little more graphically. That's the first indication of going into a hypnotic state. Mm-hmm. And when she's got that word, she'll come right out. As we start with a subject who has had no understanding at all of hypnosis, we would use familiar experiences. But primarily, we're attracting attention. We have to get the attention first. We can look at something or think of looking at something. The talking also holds the attention. The use of familiar experience here was only demonstrated with the remembering of the is she out?
Yes.
Good. With the remembering of the numbness of that arm, of lying on it. This was a familiar experience. She was able to do it. Repetition of an idea sort of underlines it, helps to shut out unnecessary thoughts. There is a relaxation as we go into hypnosis. The voluntary movements are slowed down, and on the highway, where frequently we go into hypnosis without knowing it, this slowing down of movements is a dangerous thing because you're driving a fast-moving vehicle.
Right.
Nature didn't protect us for that. Now let's go back here and see what Mrs. Ely has learned about herself. What was that word you picked, Mrs. Ely?
Peaceful.
Peaceful. Now that's a word that suggests pleasant experiences. I wish you'd hold that little pendulum up again and perhaps look up here at a spot up there. Keep your attention on it and just repeat your word to yourself. When your lids feel heavy and want to close, just let them close and go deeply to sleep. And when you're back in hypnosis, your fingers will pull apart. And I want you to notice here the fluttering of the lids. And then she goes in. Drift a little deeper, and I'd like to ask you to, here again, the catalepsy. It serves no purpose in human beings, but I think you can see in a forest it might be very helpful for an animal in a dangerous situation to hold the position until the other animal is out of the way.
Right.
Now let your arm go down here, if you will, please. And let yourself sleep for about a minute, and I wish you'd give yourself the suggestion of feeling comfortable and relaxed and well when you wake up.
Let's go over to this other section while we watch Mrs. Ely now, perhaps, and I would like to ask you a little bit, Dave, about the dangers of hypnosis. What are the things that we should be concerned with in this field? What do you feel are actual dangers?
Well, there are dangers with hypnosis, I suppose, just as there are with many other things that are good tools that are improperly used. I think the dangers have been greatly exaggerated, Probably the greatest danger of all is the ignorance of hypnosis and what it feels like. On the highway, this is probably responsible for more than 12,000 deaths a year, as nearly as I can figure from going over the statistics of deaths in places where the road is good and the driver is healthy and so on. I think that where we are able to kid ourselves out of a symptom when we know perfectly well there's a danger signal for it. Is she awake yet?
No, she's still...
Oh, she likes it, and many people do. Sometimes we have to remind them to awaken in a situation.
There she came out just then.
But if something were important that came up, she'd awaken.
How does she feel now as a result of it?
How do you feel now, Miss Ely? Good, and you'll feel even finer.
Thanks very much, Miss Ely.
I think that there are thought to be dangers with the use of hypnosis to get people to do uncivil acts, criminal acts. These would be done by persuasion. I don't think we ought to confuse persuasion with hypnosis. There is thought to be a danger of removal of symptoms, of neurotic symptoms, a headache that might mean to a patient an escape from an unpleasant situation. Actually, though, if we suggest to a person in a permissive way, ask permission of relief for that symptom, and it's acceptable, and the person decides he doesn't need to have that headache, you can trust them. They will not substitute another. You do no harm to the psyche. We've used this type of suggestion for a long time without any dangers.
Now, we've been talking about men now. Don't women go into hypnosis?
I guess that was kind of an unconscious slip, Earl. I think that women use hypnosis so naturally and so frequently that they probably don't consider it important enough to be a specialty.
Well, that seems logical. Perhaps, Dave, you could summarize for us very quickly some of the principal fields in medicine where hypnosis is used at present.
Well, in the past, hypnosis has been used for pain relief for the most part. At present, it's still used for that. We've added the ability to discover unconscious fears, too, which we'll mention if we have time. In obstetrics, it's the safest way of delivering a baby, safe to the mother, safe to the baby.
This is natural childbirth?
Natural childbirth, Grantley Dick Reed didn't recognize at first was hypnosis. The dissociation of thought away from the abdomen while they're relaxing their arms, this is a trick. I've just mentioned it with Mrs. Ely. He now recognizes that it is hypnosis. With surgery, with anesthesia, which is the same thing, in the old days they used it when they had no anesthetics. Now we use it for the patient who cannot take an anesthetic safely. This is relatively seldom. More important to find out what the fears are of the surgical patient. And anesthetists are discovering that they can talk to the surgical patient in deep surgical anesthesia and have them carry out suggestions just as though hypnotized. This is an interesting area. Dentists are using it for the relief of the apprehension of pain in the dental chair. We all have that, I guess.
Yes.
And more important probably than that, though, is the discovery that they can control bleeding. They're able to control salivation. The dentists have taught us much about this. It's easier to work in a dry mouth than a wet one.
Yes.
It's very valuable for the critically ill patient. And Esdale, whom we had down there in India, who had done the 3,000 operations, discovered this tremendous capacity of the unconscious to protect and do the right thing. It dropped his mortality from 50% to 5%. There's something that we need to know more about in this deep hypnotic state that can be helpful. And these critically ill seem to understand this need and use it. In psychiatry, it is becoming more and more used as a means of breaking through the blocks that patients sometimes get. And by using questioning techniques such as the pendulum or the little finger signals, we can get at material often that is blocked by the other ways, and this can shorten the therapy. In pediatrics, I'd say that children are the best hypnotic subjects of all. They live in hypnosis. Right. Pediatricians are using it for the relief of pain, but they're also using it to help little children discover the origins of some of their behavior problems.
Then we can expect that there will be developments in all of these fields in the future in hypnosis.
Yes, I think so. I think that the greatest challenge we as human beings have today is our ability to face the stresses of the 20th century. We're not doing a very good job. Since 1900, Earl, the death rate of the old killers, the pneumonia, the meningitis, tuberculosis, diphtheria, these have dropped off steadily. But in their place, we've had a steady rise of the diseases that seem to be due to our poor response to stress. The peptic ulcers, the heart disease, high blood pressure, the whole group of diseases that are called collagen diseases, connective tissue diseases, rheumatic fever, rheumatoid arthritis are among these. And I think that cancer should belong there definitely. Cancer is a disease of wear and tear on our poor response in the healing process to this. I think that we have a great future in the investigation of some of these diseases, finding out what the psychological attitude is to stresses, teaching people how to recognize hypnosis, teaching them how to break up their stresses during the day to sort of recharge their batteries. They can spend 2 or 3 minutes in hypnosis. Mrs. Ely will feel much rested after she gets through this evening, more rested than we. I think we could do much in this. Now, with the diseases of stress, physiologically, we can investigate these by imagined situations.
Dr. Cheek, this has been one of the most stimulating sessions that we've had on Science in Action in a long time, sir. And I want to thank you for coming to tell us about this field of investigation. Our thanks also to Mrs. Ely, and I don't want to forget our marsupial friend over here, Uga the possum.
No, Uga's going to go back in the backyard again.
Thank you, sir. Our animal of the week is the South American anteater, the giant South American anteater, only this happens to be a youngster. Newly arrived at the San Francisco Zoo, and Mr. Kerry Baldwin, who's the director, has brought this anteater over to the program this evening. Kerry, what kind of a diet do you recommend for anteaters, if you should have one on occasion?
Well, we feed them as a substitute for ants and termites. We feed them on raw hamburger and raw eggs with a little water.
Raw hamburger and raw eggs.
They seem to do very well.
Now, when this fellow's full grown, he's going to be, what, up about,
Yes.
4 feet or so?
Yes, he'll be about that high and as long as this box. They get to be quite large.
We've got another one over here. It's very noisy. While we're looking at this one, why don't we spin the other one around and see if he'll come out. And
All right.
I've read many stories about the anteaters being quite dangerous fellows. Oh, there he comes out now.
It seems lonesome.
I'll hold this one over here while you hold that one. And, well, this is an instant. I'll take my anteater. You take yours, sir.
Let's finish it.
I've always wondered how two directors were able to handle anteaters, and now I know. So I'll just take mine over the back here. You catch your anteater, will you please, sir?
Let me have mine.
Now, I want to mention that anteaters do not have teeth, but they do have claws. And these claws are sometimes a bit difficult. Now, just turn around here, Junior. The claws are the difficult part of the animal. So I'll just put mine up on the top here.
Come here, Snow.
Now, this one is the docile one, and that's why I'm holding him. And if I were a zoo man, I would have to hold the other one. Come around here. Come up here on the side. That's it. And we'll be able to see. These animals, when they grow up, we're not going to be able to handle them this way at all. Terry, very nice anteaters. And, sir, I want to thank you for bringing them over to Science in Action.
Thank you
very much.